Welcome to the Putting Your Business on the Map podcast. My name is Landon Blake. I am your podcast host. Thank you for listening. Welcome to the podcast. If you're curious and you'd like to learn more, we have a special page for the podcast up at www.landonblake.com. Make sure you check that out. We've got our show notes there. You can also download the podcast in your favorite audio format. You should also be able to find the podcast on Spotify and on YouTube. So we've got the podcast episodes in both of those places. So if you use one of those apps or services, you can subscribe to the podcast there. Full disclaimer, I record most of these episodes at my home in Stockton, California. I am married to a crazy Mexican woman, and I have 2 dogs, so you may hear her or the dogs during the podcast episode. I just want to warn you ahead of time. I love all 3 of them, but they are noisy. So if you would like to sponsor a private recording studio for the podcast, make sure you reach out to me and let me know that. Otherwise, you may have some background noise. So with that disclaimer out of the way, we're going to jump right into today's episode. The title of this episode is Evaluating the Performance of Teams, Small and Large. It's inspired by a magazine in The Economist. So I am a subscriber to The Economist. I highly encourage you to check that out. If you are a business owner and you enjoy economics, I picked an issue up at the airport a decade ago because I was bored and didn't have anything else to read, and I've been a subscriber ever since, so it's a great magazine. So they've got a column in the magazine called Bartleby. The columnist talks about business issues, and they had an article in that column a few months ago. So it was in November, and the title of the article, I'm just going to read it here so I make sure I get it right, is How to Manage Teams in a World Designed for Individuals. So if you're on YouTube, you'll be able to see it. Here it is. I have it pulled up on the Economist website. You do have to be a subscriber. After you viewed, 3 or 4 articles on the website, you hit a paywall. So you do have to be a subscriber after you've read a couple articles. But you should be able to get the first article for free. So if you want to check this out. So that's what we're going to do today. I've never tried this before, so this is a first for the podcast here on episode 6, but I'm going to try this format and see how it works. And basically, I'm going to take an article from The Economist or Wall Street Journal, Harvard Business Review, or MIT Sloan. I subscribe to all those. If I have an article that I think is that I enjoy, that I think is super applicable to surveying and mapping businesses, I'll try and talk about the main points in the article and how they apply. I don't know if it's going to work, but we're going to try it. So we'll see how that goes today. You guys, if you're one of my 3 podcast listeners, you can let me know what you think of this format. And certainly, if you like the format and you have an article that you want me to talk about, send it to me. Or if you're willing to be interviewed about an article, I would love to do that too. So before I dive into the article, and we're going to cover the main points, I want to tell you a story. This is a true story. It happened to me a few years ago. But it's related to the theme that we're going to talk about, evaluation of teams. So I was working as a licensed land surveyor for a large civil engineering company. I'd been there about a year, I think. And so the COO, the chief operating officer of the company, it's a pretty big company, it's 500 people, came to basically take me to lunch for my 1-year anniversary, which was very flattering. I had never talked to him before, so he called me up and said, "Hey, I want to take you and your boss out to lunch. I know you've been with us a year." I was super stoked about that. I don't know that I filled a super critical role there. That was a pretty big company, and I was just a project surveyor. But so I was deeply flattered that he would want to talk to me. And he was a super nice guy. I really liked. In fact, I think he's still the COO at the company. I haven't been there for a long time, but he was a good guy, and he took me and my boss to lunch. So, he was primarily wanting to get my feedback on what I thought of his company. And so one of the things I told him is And I remember this because he laughed. I said, I've never worked at a place like this before. I said, you guys aren't really a single organization. You're more like a loose coalition of warring tribes. And so he laughed for a half a minute or a minute. And he said, well, tell me what you mean by that. And I said, well, I've never been at a place where there's so much conflict and backstabbing between teams inside of the organization. And I said, I'm just being honest with you. I've worked at several different places. I've never seen a company with this kind of culture before. And after he got done kind of having a chuckle, he got serious and he said, I appreciate you being honest with me. He said, we recognize that this is a problem we have. On the executive management team, we know this is a problem and we're trying to think about how we might fix it. He said, we don't have answers to that yet. And so I appreciated that I was honest with him and he was honest with me back, right? Which is great. That's a good COO. And then one of the things we talked about a little bit there at that lunch was, part of the reason why that culture had permeated there, I'm sure there were a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons was they had some poorly designed financial incentives. So they had a lot of fairly small teams, so 5 to 15 people. Each team was assigned a team leader. And the way they had set up the compensation there, that team leader received a large portion of their annual compensation based on basically the amount of gross revenue that he or she booked. So they have what they called a book. They called it a green book. And the more dollar volume of work that was in your green book, essentially the bigger your year-end bonus was. And the year-end bonus was a significant part of compensation. Now, I was not a team leader. So all of my work was going into my boss's book, which is fine. I didn't have a problem with that. I actually negotiated an hourly position at that company, so that wasn't a problem for me. I wasn't salaried. But one of the consequences of that was there was a lot of backstabbing and cutthroat competition between team leaders. So rarely did team leaders work across team boundaries when that would make sense either for the client or the organization as a whole. So part of what would happen, just as an example, is, maybe one team was having a slow February and another team was grinding people because they were overwhelmed with work. The team that was buried would not share work with the team that needed work. I mean, that just almost never happened there. And so, that led to, just think about the business consequences of that, right? Higher overtime costs and poor utilization. So, the team that was buried was paying a bunch of unnecessary overtime costs, burning out their people. The team that needed work, they were losing money because they were paying wages and they weren't, the team wasn't billable, so it was low utilization, or they were cutting hours or sending people home and risking the loss of good employees. So that's just one example. There's all kinds of examples of the really bad consequences of that system that they had designed. Sorry, I'm trying not to bump my microphone. So, the way they chose to organize teams there and evaluate teams was a large, I think, contributing factor to their toxic culture, and I think there was some recognition of that at the executive management level. So evaluating performance is very important, right? And that's something that we try and do here at my company. We'll do a separate episode, I hope, on how we evaluate individual performance. That's not what we're talking about today, though. We're talking about how we evaluate team importance. So why? Why is that? Why is that so important? It's important because most of our work now in the modern economy is done as teams. So we're not individual craftsmen. You don't go see an individual blacksmith or wagon wright or seamstress. We work in teams almost always in our economy. The other reason, I'll try not to say or K too much, working on my word whiskers. The other reason that's important, teamwork is important, is because you throw a group of star players together on a field, that does not make a superstar team. So successful team building is a lot more than just getting talented people and putting them in the same room. That's something that's become more and more clear to me as I've gotten older. So, the composition of the team, the mix of personalities, the team chemistry, the rules that the team operates under, those are all really critical things to whether or not a team is going to be successful. And now, I'm not a sports fan, I'll just tell you. I don't watch a lot of sports, but I think if you're a sports fan, you'll know that there are teams of star players that often lose to teams of maybe less talented players, still talented, but not superstars, but because they have good team chemistry and good training and good teamwork, that team of less skilled players can beat a team of superstars. And so I think the same thing applies in business as well. So we're going to do two things in this episode. It has two main parts. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to review the main points in that article from The Economist. I'm going to read you a little snippet of that here in a minute. And then we're going to just talk a little bit about how those principles apply or operate at my business. I keep saying my business, our business, the company I work at, Redefine Horizons. I'm just one person in that team. So we'll talk a little bit about how we evaluate teams at RH. A lot of room for improvement there. So how we organize and evaluate teams. Okay, so part one, let's get into that. That's just kind of a review of the main points in this article from The Economist Magazine. And so the title of the article is The Collaboration Conundrum. It's in the Bartleby column, as I mentioned. This was it's in the November, it's either the 6th or the 11th, I'm not sure, issue of the magazine. And so what I want to do is right now is just read you the opening paragraph from the article. So I'm going to do that. It says, and I quote, "There is no I in team, but there is one in autopilot. Despite the growing importance of teamwork in organizations, the processes used to manage employees have carried on much as before. Bosses may wax lyrical about collaboration, but the way they reward, review, and recruit has not caught up." Man, what a great opening paragraph, right? And I really like this columnist. They're a little snarky, and I appreciate that. They have a little bit of a dry sense of humor. Some of that may have come through. So that's the opening paragraph to the article. So what are the main points? And it's a short article. It's only a half a page. So one of the things they mentioned, teamwork is growing in importance to the success of the organizations. They give some reasons why that is. One is technology has made the sharing of ideas and information easier. Another is hybrid work and remote work has made that sharing of ideas and information more and more important to getting work done. The software industry, especially in the Silicon Valley, has kind of spread the gospel of agile teams and teamwork. So other types of businesses are paying more attention to that now. Without a doubt, teams are better at solving complex problems. One of the things I love about working at Redefined Horizons is I've got really smart people working for me, both at my level in the organization and below me, and we are so much better at solving problems, hard problems, internal problems and problems for our client than I would ever be on my own. And it's so rewarding. I really love that. So that's important. And then, the other thing is if you're worried about employee retention and employee satisfaction, people have a strong attachment to their teams or work groups. Oftentimes they have a stronger attachment to their team than they do the actual organization they work for. That's why sometimes in the design industry, you will see teams follow a leader from one company to another. I have certainly done that with some members of my team. I've taken teams from one employer to another. So yeah, there's some emotional attachment there to the team. Now the article brings out, despite all those reasons why teamwork is important and getting more important, there's a contradiction, right? What's the contradiction? Well, management practices still focus on individuals rather than teams. So we tend to evaluate the performance of individuals, not the performance of teams. So when I say management practices, what am I talking about? They identify three in the article. I'm going to call them the 3 R's. They're not called that in the article, but so what are the 3 R's? Recruiting, reviews, and rewards. So let's talk about that. Recruitment, that's just, when we go to hire people for our companies, we tend to focus on their achievements and skills as individuals rather than what they've achieved in the groups they've been a part of. I think that's very, very true. When we review people's performance or evaluate, we usually do that at the individual level. We do that at the team level. And even when we think we're doing it at the team level, we might still be doing it at the individual level. And that big civil engineering company I gave was an example. They thought they were rewarding team performance, and what they were really rewarding was the performance of the team leader, right? And in that case, their focus was too tight, right? They had focused on teams that were too small, and then that part of that was what led to, the inefficiencies that we talked about. We also tend to measure performance based on concrete outputs rather than soft skills that are important to teamwork. Man, that is so true. I don't know that I've ever worked at an organization that has done a good job of evaluating soft skills. Typically when you're working in a professional consulting or design firm, they're looking at your utilization rate, what percentage of your time is billable. They're looking at, are your projects coming in on budget? Those are the two main metrics, both very hard numbers that are easy to measure and have nothing to do with what kind of team player you are, for sure. And then the third thing, rewards. So that's things like bonuses and promotions. Those are typically given on an individual level based on individual performance. Most companies don't do a great job of rewarding teams. The last thing that they talk about in the article is, most managers don't understand what the people on their teams do. That is mind-blowing to me because I work for a small company, but I can understand why that is. So they just have a statistic in the article that I thought was interesting. They said on average, the managers that were polled in a particular survey didn't or couldn't recall what 68% of the people on their teams did, like what their core job function or day-to-day activities were. That's a huge number, 68%. So we don't have that problem at Redefine Horizons. I know what everybody on my team does, but I can see how as your team gets bigger and your organization gets bigger, that becomes more and more of a problem. Now, one thing I like about the columnist is they try to be balanced and realistic. So they say, hey, the columnist they understand that there are some major challenges for organizations that want to shift some of their focus from evaluating individuals to the performance of individuals to evaluating the performance of teams. So why is that hard? What are the challenges? Now, just because it's hard doesn't mean you shouldn't try, but there's recognition from the columnist that this is difficult. So what are some reasons why it's difficult? The columnist mentions a few in the article. One is people move jobs and make career advancement as individuals, not as groups. And when you look at somebody's resume, most of that is focused on what they've done as an individual, not what they've done as a team. The other challenge is when you start to reward team performance instead of individual performance, that could lead to unfairness, right? It can lead to free riding, potentially. So you have to consider that. And then it's also more of a challenge to measure team performance, right? So you don't have a concrete number like utilization rate. It's difficult to measure how individual people are contributing to a team effort. So those are all challenges. But in the article, they talk about, hey, we think those challenges can be overcome. When you're recruiting, you can assess for traits or, characteristics that are responsible for team success if you put some effort into that. When you review performance, you can collect and use input from team members. They didn't mention this in the article, but one of the things I've tried is when you have a person that doesn't seem to be performing well, you can try switching them to a new team to see if the new team dynamics make a difference. Now, sometimes you've got a person that just doesn't work well with others, and so you can try 2 or 3 different teams, and if they can't work on any of those teams, that may be an indication that there's a problem there with the person, not with the team dynamics. And then on the rewards, a couple things you can do to try and address some of those challenges is just keep in mind that when you reward team performance, it will probably lead to better outcomes for the organization and your clients than rewarding individual performance. And if you have that kind of system set up, it's going to attract the right kind of person to your organization. If your incentives or your rewards are based on well-functioning teams, and you're upfront about that in the recruiting process, you're going to tend to attract people that like teamwork because they know that's how they're going to be rewarded. All right, so the second part of the episode is a little more challenging, and that's where we're going to just talk about how are we trying to apply this at our company where I work, Redefine Horizons. So I'll tell you, we have lots of room to improve here, and that's part of the reason why I enjoyed the article so much was because it gave me a lot to think about. I haven't finished thinking about this. I need to chew on it a lot more. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to do the podcast episode. So we have a lot of room to improve. One of the things that's changed for us in the last couple of years is we now have enough employees to support multiple small teams. Back when it was just me and Danny and Austin or Elena, that wasn't really an issue. We were one team for everything. Now we're large enough, we're getting to be somewhere between 12 and 15 people. And so we can have small teams, different small teams that are made up of different individuals. So I need to start to think about this more as a manager, as a managing principal. So let's talk a little bit about, I want to talk about how we form teams here, how we structure teams, and then, how we evaluate and reward team performance. So the process we use to form teams right now is pretty informal. And that works well for us, I think, right now because we're small and all three principals have a pretty good idea of what's going on in the organization. But that's something we need to think about as we grow. We may need to formalize that process a little bit. Maybe not even formalize, but just be more deliberate about it. I think a lot of how it happens right now is just kind of organic and ad hoc. So we have four main types of teams here. Four main types of teams at Redefine Horizons. So we have what I call job teams. So those are people that are working together on a particular job. That's usually fairly small, so it's somewhere between 3 to 5 people, depending on the job. We have client teams, so those are individuals that work together to serve the needs of the same client on multiple projects. We didn't do a lot of that our first couple of years because most of our work was transactional, but now we have some long-term clients, and so client teams are a very real thing here now. We have, I want to say maybe 4 client teams. So those are people that address the needs of a client, not a specific job. Then we have just some what I call informal teams. So that's like our field surveyors are an informal team. I have my business support staff is an informal team. We kind of have a group of people that work on human resources. We have a group of people that work on, the financials, the bookkeeping. And it's kind of funny when I was thinking about what informal teams we had, that I can kind of see that structure emerge organically in the way we organize our chats on Microsoft Teams. So it's I say informal because it's very much not structured, right? These are just kind of groups that emerge given the tasks that they're assigned or working on. And then one of the things we've done pretty recently, so this is the last year or two, just because I'm a business geek and I like to run experiments on my poor people, is we've tried to do something we call aspect teams, which is where we've tried to take informal teams and make them a little more formal. So right now we basically have 2 aspect teams that I think function fairly well. That's the CAD management team and the record of survey map team that we have here. So those teams meet on a semi-regular basis and have pretty well-defined scope of responsibility and a set member list. Now I need to do a better job of managing our aspect teams. That's on my list of to-dos. So what are we doing a good job of? I told you there's a lot of room for improvement, but let me give some credit where credit's due. Let me talk about 4 things we're doing a good job of. So we don't hire jerks here. We're really good at that. We're pretty good at identifying those people in the interview process. Not only that, but we tend to hire people that are referred to us. We don't hire off the street, almost never. But we're pretty good about weeding out jerks. If you're a jerk, you either don't make it through the interview process or you don't last very long here. And so that's good. So that we tend to hire people that work well in teams. Number 2, we do make an effort to recognize team success, I think. Now, I will tell you right now that is mostly informal. So we don't do that on a formal basis or a concrete basis, and that's part of what I need to think about. But I know that I personally, as a managing principal, make an effort to thank and recognize our teams when they do well. But that could certainly be more deliberate and formal. As I mentioned, we've started experimenting with aspect teams, right? And aspect teams are just basically a way to take an informal team and add some structure. I need to do a better job of managing the kind of 2 active aspect teams we have, and then taking a couple of those informal teams and making them more formal via aspect teams. So I need to think about that more, and I need to do a better job of it. And then we do a good job, I believe, so this is number 4, we do a good job of selecting teams for our job teams. We do a good job of selecting people for our job teams and our client teams. So those teams are pretty stable. They don't see a lot of change. So when we get a group of people together to work on a job or a team, that group doesn't change frequently. So those teams are stable. and we've done we know who works well together. We know we have a pretty good idea of who has the complementary skills, and so I think we do a pretty good job of team composition. Now, part of that's because we're still fairly small, and I have a good understanding. My partners and I have a good understanding of all of our employees. So I know why that would get harder as an organization grows. So what are some things we could do better on? I have some goals here. What are some things that my team could do better on when it comes to the way we structure teams and the way we evaluate team performance? I think we need to do a better job of evaluating soft skills. I've made some baby steps on that with my human resources specialist, who's also my wife. So we're trying to rejigger the interview process a little bit and assess some more of that. And I'm also thinking about how we incorporate soft skills now into what we call our monthly look-aheads and our annual reviews. But I need to think some more about it. We don't do a good job right now getting feedback, team feedback. Feedback from team members on how the other people on their team work together. So I need to certainly give that some more thought. I need a better understanding of just team dynamics. That's something I need to learn more about. I've got a couple books that I want to read about that, business books. But, just understanding things like hierarchy, the way people seek status, how different personalities work together. Again, I've made some baby steps here. So I kind of geek out on like personality tests and the different types of personalities. So I'll try and remember to put this in the show notes, but there's a cool website I like called 16 Personalities. And I've had some of my people take that test, and I'm trying to learn more about how different personalities work together. We have a pretty flat structure here, so we are not huge on job titles and pecking orders. I think as I've gotten older and run the company for a few years, I realize that's more important to other people than it is to me, and maybe I can't completely ignore that. I struggle with that a little bit. I'm not a big fan of people that fascinate on job titles and hierarchy, but I understand people do get there is some level of emotional attachment to that. Man, I need to give some more thought to how I find that balance, right? Like I want to run a flat organization and have people that are willing to do any task that's assigned to them, at least on a short-term basis. But I also want to recognize that people do care about their status and their job title. So I got to give that some more thought. I don't have good answers to all that yet. I need to talk to my partners about it more. So that's an area that I need to work on personally. Just better understanding of team dynamics and some of those issues that come with team dynamics. Like I talked about, I want to shift some more of our informal teams to formal aspect teams. I think that'll get more important as we grow as an organization. And then the last thing, and this is kind of the whole point of the article that was in Economist, is I just need to think about how we evaluate and reward team performance. We don't have a good system for that yet. So I want to think about, how we can introduce that. And I don't know if it'll work for an organization as small as we are, but I want to think about it. Maybe we'll run some little experiments and try it out. I don't want to do what the giant engineering firm did that I talked about at the beginning of the podcast and set up a really bad incentive structure that encourages bad behavior. I don't want to do that. But so I want to think a little bit more about how I can incentivize team performance and good teamwork. And I don't know, maybe those are monetary incentives, maybe they're not. I gotta consider that, talk to my partners about it. All right, so in review, what did we talk about today? 5 main points that we covered. Number 1, teamwork is growing in importance. Talked about some of the reasons why that is. Number 2, there's this contradiction that we see between the growing importance of teamwork and our current management practices, right? They tend to focus on the individual and not on teams. We talked about the 3 R's, right? Recruiting, retention, and rewards, I think, were the 3 R's. And how they apply to individuals and teams. We talked about the challenges in shifting some of your evaluation of performance as an organization from individuals to teams and how you might overcome some of those challenges. And then the last part of the episode, the second main part, we talked about how we currently form teams at RH, the 4 types of teams we have, and some goals that I personally have as a managing principal on how we can do better about the way we structure teams, evaluate team performance, and reward teams. So some things I'd like to talk about in future episodes, are I'd like to talk a little bit more about those team dynamics we mentioned. Which kind of personalities work well together? What's the appropriate level of status or pecking order? How do you create an organization with a relatively flat structure? When is it important that teams can form and reform quickly? When is it more important to have stable teams? So I'd like to talk about that more. I'd like to talk more about just, what's the process that you use as a business owner to form and manage teams in a small surveying or mapping organization. So lots of interesting things there. I got some reading to do. I got some more books to read, some more articles to read. If you know of a great podcast about teamwork in business or just teamwork in the wider world, please let me know. You can post it in the comments on YouTube or shoot me an email or a text. That would be great. So what are we going to talk about in the next episode? That would be episode number 7. We're going to talk about strategy. So strategy versus tactics and business planning for your mapping organization. I've actually scripted part of that and realized that's probably enough for 2 episodes of 30 to 40 minutes. So I think we're going to break it into 2 parts. What I'm going to do in the first part is just kind of go over some of the concepts. There's a really cool article from Harvard Business Review that we're going to talk about. It's such a great article that I'm not even going to cover the whole article. I'm just going to cover about the first half. So it'll be a similar episode to this one. And then the second part of that, so the second episode on that topic is we're actually going to go in and look at a strategic plan. That's one of the things I've been working on last year and this year is getting some strategic plans done, both for Redefined Horizons and for some other organizations that I'm involved with on a volunteer basis. So we'll look at kind of an outline I've come up with for a strategic plan, and maybe we'll even work through a theoretical strategic plan. I haven't decided yet, but that should be interesting. So I look forward to that. I hope you guys enjoyed episode number 6, and I hope that you enjoyed this format. Let me know. You can give me some feedback on that. If you guys liked it, we'll do some more of these where we take a dive into an article or a book chapter on business. So thank you guys for listening. Appreciate it. That's going to wrap up our episode for today. Once again, I want to thank you guys for listening. Appreciate that. Don't forget, you can check out the podcast, download episodes, view show notes at www.landonblake.com. You can also subscribe to the podcast on YouTube and Spotify. If you would like to be a guest on the podcast or you have a suggestion for a future topic for an episode, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. You can find my contact information all over the web. Landon Blake, I'd love to hear from you, and we will catch you guys on the next episode. Thanks.